Hey, Period 5. So we're about to read chapter 13 of Ransom. This picture is the cliff that Buck had fallen off from. His car swerved, remember? He was trying to hit Bruce, and his car went over the cliff. And we're going back to the cabin. Remember, Juan has Glenn. Met Glenn on the road in chapter 12. Both Rod and Juan met him and put him in the car, and they're going back to the cabin. Glenn was so close in getting away. Let's find out what happens. Chapter 13, page 154. The cabin was quiet, a strange quiet, a stillness of arrested motion, of things unfinished, of branches bent almost to the breaking point. What is to come next? Marianne asked herself. What can possibly come next? For the quiet was of waiting and a final acceptance of the helplessness of their position. Whatever happened next would not be of their doing. It would come from some place outside themselves. They could only wait. He is dead, Bruce had told them. Buck is dead. He had spoken the words slowly in an emotionless voice. The car went off the road. Rita had not believed him. You are lying. Nothing can happen to Buck. What do you hope to do by saying such things, you rotten little liar? Was it that she did not believe, Marianne wondered, or that she would not let herself believe? Bruce had not answered. He had gone instead to the fire, and Jessie had brought a blanket and put it around him, and then had left the room again to return to Dexter. Bruce had sunk to the hearth, and he was there now, crouched in the same position, his eyes closed against the pane as feeling returned to his half-frozen hands. He was rubbing them slowly up and down against his trouser leg, his head bent forward, resting against his knee. Marianne went over to him and knelt beside him. Are you okay, Bruce? Can I do anything? No. He did not raise his head. Do you want some soup, coffee, something hot? No, thank you. How are your hands? Okay, I guess. I mean, they hurt. They hurt like blazes. I guess the bad thing would be if I couldn't feel them. What happened to Buck's jacket? Marianne asked him. You were wearing it when you left. I gave it to Glenn. His voice was oddly blank as he spoke his brother's name. He needed it. He was going to try to hike all the way back to the village. Do you think he can do it? Marianne asked. I guess so. Glenn usually manages to do anything he sets out to do. And Buck? I told you. But you're sure that he is dead, I mean. Rita doesn't believe you. She's in the bedroom now with all those paperbacks of hers, reading and waiting for him to get back. He won't be coming back, Bruce said. For a moment, he was tempted to describe it, the blazing wreck at the foot of the cliff, the hissing sound of the orange gasoline flames as they leaped like living animals against the snow. He had drawn as close as he dared, feeling the scorching heat reaching out to him, straining to see past the blazing inferno into whatever dark recesses lay beyond in the twisted blur of blackened metal, repeating to himself frantically the words that Glenn had uttered on the road above. That man was trying to kill you. That's why he went over the cliff. He was trying to kill you. You don't owe him one blasted thing. But the words had held no meaning. Somewhere in that hell of fire there was a man. No words could make that fact less dreadful. He had stood watching, hypnotized by horror and helplessness, until finally some innate sense of self-preservation had told him to move away before there was an explosion. It took half an hour to climb back up the cliff, clutching with frozen and gloveless hands at rocks and bushes, wondering how he had managed to make the descent so quickly. And all the while he climbed, he waited for the explosion. It never came. When he reached the level road and turned to look down again, the flames were gone. For a moment he struggled with the temptation to tell her, to share the experience, and by so doing, to make it less terrible, more like a story to be exclaimed and gasped over. But the reality was still too close to him. The words would not come. He won't be coming back, Bruce said, and left it at that. He was shivering. He had been there by the fire for a long time now, but still he was shivering. Marianne reached to straighten the blanket over his shoulders and then impulsively put her arms around him, as she might have around Jay or Jackie, saying, as they all had said so often during the past days, it will be all right. Everything will work out all right. No, Bruce said, nothing will ever be all right. But if Glenn makes it to the village and You said yourself that you think he will. He will call for help. With Buck gone, there isn't any danger here. Rita certainly won't do anything to us. We'll just sit and wait until help comes." Bruce shivered again, drawing a little away from her. He did not want to be touched or comforted. The ache within him was not fear. It was deeper than fear. He felt 1,000,000 years old. Glenn, he thought. Glenn, Glenn. There were footsteps on the wooden floor behind them, and Jessie came to join them by the fire. She looked tired, but oddly peaceful. "How are your hands, Bruce? Do you think they're all right?" "I've got some feeling back in them." He was still rubbing them up and down against his trouser leg. "What about Dexter? Do you think he's going to be okay?" "He has lost a lot of blood, but I don't think the wound itself is too serious. We have the bleeding stop now. He's sleeping." Her face grew soft as she thought of the dark head against the pillow and remembered the way he had stared up at her in stunned bewilderment. "What was that for?" he had stammered. "I don't know." Jessie had been as startled as he was. I guess I just felt like kissing you." "I hope you don't make a business of going around doing that to everybody." "No, oh no," she assured him quickly. "Actually, I don't think I've ever kissed anybody in my life before, except, of course, my parents." He regarded her in astonishment. "Why not? A girl as pretty as you are?" "I don't know. I guess I just never wanted to." "But why now?" "I don't know, I tell you." "You're sorry for me. Is that it?" His voice began to harden. "You don't have to be. If you think you're going to play the fairy princess, going around kissing cripples to turn them into—" "What an ugly thing to say!" Jessie interrupted. "What a perfectly horrid, mean little thing to say!" The anger in her voice startled Dexter into a silence. He lay gazing up at her, amazed by the violence of her reaction. "Just because I haven't dated a lot, because I'm not the popularity queen that Mary Ann is, doesn't mean that I'm going to settle for any halfway kind of man, Dexter Barton. I wouldn't take a cripple on a silver platter. I'd rather go through my whole life without ever loving anybody than be stuck with somebody who wasn't fine and strong and solid. Maybe I haven't spent my life doing jitterbugs and watching movies and mooning over football players, but I have known people, fine, interesting people. I knew a Russian countess who had her land and her jewels and her money taken away from her, but she was still every inch a countess. I knew a man in Switzerland who was an amputee. He lost a leg during the war, escaping from a Nazi concentration camp. And do you know he skis? On one leg, using the poles for balance. Her normally pale face was flushed with emotion. I've heard symphonies written by blind composers and seen cathedrals designed by dying artists, and none of them was a cripple. None of them. It's bitterness that makes a person a cripple. Bitterness and meanness and smallness. It's an emptiness inside them, not anything to do with their bodies. For a moment, when she finished, there was silence. Then Dexter said, Phew! I guess I can consider myself told off. I guess you can. Jessie dropped her eyes, embarrassed by her vehemence. I'm sorry. I don't know what got into me. I didn't have any right to say those things. You sure didn't. Just like a woman, always trying to make a guy over. One kiss and she thinks she owns him, body and soul. The words were brusque, but the dark eyes held a hint of teasing. If the lecture is over, do you think you might please bandage up my shoulder? Of course, I said I'm sorry. To her surprise, she saw that he was smiling. Say, Jessie, when you're finished, yes? Well, you don't own a guy body and soul after one kiss. It's just possible, though, that after two of them... He was sleeping now. Jessie sat quietly, thinking about him, the hard, unhandsome face, the stubby lashes dark against the pale cheek. He had gone to sleep holding her hand. She liked the thought of his sleeping with his hand in hers, his face gone soft and vulnerable with all the bitterness eased out of it. Somehow, as she sat there beside him, the tension had eased out of her as well, leaving her peaceful and unfrightened. What will be, she thought now, as Mary Ann had, as Bruce had. There is nothing more we can do but wait. It was not she who first heard the approach of the car. It was Mary Ann who, lifting her head, said, Listen, isn't that a car motor? And even then it was a moment before the others heard it. the grinding, straining sound of an automobile mounting the last steep curve of the road to the cabin. So they have no idea who's about to come to the cabin, but we will find out in chapter 14.